Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Survivor 46 following episode 5. And this was probably the best episode of the season so far. Definitely a fun vote out and definitely a lot to break down here, but we'll get to that soon enough. But there are 14 people to talk about, and as we waste no more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 14, we have the boot from this week, and here we have Gem. And this was a pretty big downfall for her here, and I was kind of conflicted for a lot of the episode over whether she was actually going to be the boot here, where she got a lot of setup to her being overconfident, her overplaying, with her really standing out over the rest of the Sega tribe here, where she continues her whole beware advantage scheme of her trying to pin the blame on Tim. You have her game talks with Ben and Tim before Tribal, where she was pretty confrontational with her asking them to give out a name and having people like Ben talking about how she is playing the game too hard. And all this was pretty bad. And I felt like coming into this week, I was definitely going to drop her because of it. I was just unsure over whether this was actually her boot episode here or if it was just going to be a decoy and she was just going to be a big player to be taken out later on. But obviously, it does end up being her boot episode here, where she is taken out pretty handily. And I think a lot of the reason why I didn't think she was going home was because Maria had talked about wanting to keep her around, and Charlie had been more undercut in the edit compared to her. So I thought that this was going to be a case of Maria getting her way, where she'd be able to keep Gem in the game, and Charlie would just continue to be undercut. I was kind of feeling weird about Charlie for a lot of the episode, to be honest. And we'll talk about that more when we get to those people, but no, it turns out that Charlie got his way and Gem was the one to go home here. And I think that kind of recontextualizes how I feel about a lot of people on this tribe, but we'll get to that soon enough. But if we are talking about Gem, I definitely think she overplayed her hand here, where I even said last week that this entire plan of hiding the Beware advantage felt pretty pointless, considering that she was already in the majority and it seemed like Tin Spicer was already on the bottom and could have been a target there. And I even said at the time that this plan could have backfired in a number of ways. Though to be fair, it didn't backfire in the way I expected it to, where coming into it, I thought it was going to be a case of people finding out that the Beware advantage had been moved and they would eventually find out that Gem was the one to have it. But it turns out that didn't happen, where it doesn't really seem like anyone actually knew that Gem had the idol all along, but instead it backfires for different reasons, where it turns out that by Gem painting this target on Tin's back by making it seem like he had the idol, that kind of shifted the target away from Tim, as people didn't want to risk him playing the idol there, and that shifted the target to Ben instead, which caused people like Charlie to back out of the plan and instead push for alternative targets. And at the point where Gem became the alternative target over Ben, it just made sense for Charlie and Maria to put their votes onto her instead. And the fact that Gem goes out here with an idol in her pocket is pretty bad. So on the whole, I do think Gem ultimately did it to herself, where she did overplay her hand by the end of it. And even reading her exit interview, it does seem like that moving forward, her plans were to get towards the end with the bigger players trying to make all these big moves and getting to the end with these big threats and just duking it out at that point. So even if she had survived this round and made the merge, I don't think she would have won the game per se based off what we've read about afterwards. But still, she is now out of the game to where she's here at number 14. And before we continue, I am once again partnering up with Russell Muscle TV to promote Idle Plays. Idle Plays is an online shop where you can purchase Survivor puzzles and practice them. That way you can potentially be the next challenge beast on Survivor 47 and beyond. In this season, we have creator lockers. These are special bundles handpicked by myself and other Survivor YouTubers, along with creator trading cards. If you purchase my puzzle, you can get your hands on the Labyrinth Ball puzzle, the Slide puzzle, and Spencer's puzzle from Survivor Cambodia. If you want to take home these puzzles and more, feel free to use my link in the description or use my affiliate code, Survivor Gumball, and start prepping now. And with that, there are 13 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game, based on their edit and current game position, as we head now into Mergatory. But number 13, the person I believe is the least likely to win the game from this point on, is Liz. And I did bump Liz back to the bottom here, considering that she continues to come off as a bit of a dodo, where her only content here is at the beginning, where we see all the Namis looking for the idol, except for Liz, because she doesn't want to idol hunt, because she's bad at finding things, and she's even prone to losing her shoes. And again, this is just more dodo content for her here, and considering that the person I had at the bottom of last week's ranking had more to do this week, and I feel like I don't have as much positive to say about Liz. I did decide to leave her here at the bottom at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we actually have another person on the Nami tribe, but we do have Soda. And I'll be honest, I think compared to Liz and Soda, I think Soda's in more danger of going home next week, considering the setup that she's already gotten to her being this threat that needs to be taken out. Where we got all that set up in her last episode, to her being taken out, and even in this episode, we got some pretty foreboding things. Like her one confessional comes during the idol hunt, where she says that she doesn't want the idol to fall into the wrong hands, only for Hunter to find it, aka one of the main people targeting her, which I do think is a pretty bad look there. And considering the negativity she's already gotten with her, like being selfish and these people on her tribe want a gun for her, I think there's a big chance that she goes home in the next couple of rounds, if not next week. So I feel like I'm feeling pretty bad about Soda at this point. But again, she has been a bigger character compared to Liz. I think at the very least, there is more of a path for her moving forward if she's not the boot. But considering I think she's in a lot of danger next week, I do have her here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we actually have the person I had at the bottom of last week's ranking, but we do have Tim Spicer. And I'm actually pretty surprised he's still in the game, considering I thought he would have been the first gone out of Sega. But he's able to skate through this episode without even getting any votes, so at least that's something. Now beyond that, I do think that this episode was kind of questionable for him. He did get a visibility spike, and he does get some moments here and there, with I think the main one being him winning the battle over Gem. But beyond that, I think there's some questionable stuff as well, like him continuing to harp on his relationship with Maria, thinking that they're super tight, when Maria herself has said multiple times that she doesn't really want to work with Tim. And even this episode, like you have him like agreeing to this alliance between Q and Hunter, where he thinks he can pull Maria into that, which is pretty questionable. So again, I'm still not feeling great about Tim. I do feel like he's not winning at this point, and it wouldn't shock me if he gets like idled out or taken out in some weird way. But for those reasons, I do have him here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we actually have another person on Sega, and here we have Mariah. And again, I'm just not sure what to make of Mariah's edit at this point, where she does get some content here with Sega going to tribal. She gets the pretty generic content about how like she doesn't know what's going on, and she thinks that all these idols and advantages are going to come out, and it does result in her being left out of the plan, where she is one of the people to vote with Gem there, which isn't particularly great. And I feel like on the whole, this was not a great look for her gameplay wise, with her being on the outs and her just coming off pretty clueless over what's happening over this actual vote. And considering her content before this episode has been pretty weird, where again, last episode, her main content was her not jumping. And before that, she got pretty like circumstantial content that doesn't really feel like it adds to anything. I just don't think Mariah is winning at this point. I think this episode just continues to muddle her overall edit, where it feels like she doesn't really have much of a purpose to the story. It just feels like she's just being given whatever. So I feel like for those reasons, I can't have her any higher than number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have the first person from the Yanu tribe, and here we have Q. And again, I'm kind of conflicted on Q at this point. He does get plenty of content here talking about how he wants to target Kenzie and how he's trying to make it seem like he's going to quit just to lower Kenzie's guard. At this point, it does seem like there's going to be this rivalry between Q and Kenzie that'll play out soon. But beyond that, he also gets his moment at the summit where he does propose his alliance with Tim and Hunter about these big threats, kind of creating this brigade style of alliance. And on paper, that's fine, except that Tim wants to bring in Maria when Maria said that she doesn't want to work with him. And I think even Tevin may not agree to such an alliance. So again, I do feel like the alliance itself doesn't seem that serious in the grand scheme of things. I'd be shocked if this becomes a genuine alliance moving forward. In general, I think Q is probably not the best gain spot to where he'll probably be an early merge boot, I think. But even beyond that, I feel like he's pretty underdeveloped compared to plenty of other people in the edit up to this point. I feel like a lot of his content just feels kind of situational, but because of that, I do have him here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have someone who has gone down compared to last week, but we do have Venus. And this was a pretty bad episode for Venus here, where she does try to continue on her rivalry with Hunter by like spying on him while he's idol hunting. But I do think Hunter fights back, and I feel like it's to Venus's detriment, where she tries confronting him and that she doesn't care how annoyed he gets. But then we see Hunter responding by saying that he's annoyed by this and that he just wants her to leave. And by the end of it, like she also admits to him that she's using him as a meat shield, which I don't think is a great look. Or from an edit standpoint, it contradicts her claim earlier about how she wants to take him out early because he's a big threat. And it's also bad from a gameplay standpoint, as she's pretty much admitting to him that she's planning to target him down the line, which is also not a great look. So on the whole, I feel like this was a bad episode for Venus, and considering that I was already on the fence about her as a contender, I feel like this is what really drags her down to number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have someone who I am kind of on the fence about at this point, even though this person has moved up from last week, but we do have Kenzie. Now, I have been hearing online that people seem to be pretty high on Kenzie and that they think that she is secretly being set up to win. And admittedly, I don't believe it. I still think that she isn't coming off the best on the show, where in this episode, she just continues to be this barometer for Yanu's attitude, where a lot of it is her complaining about how they suck and how they keep losing challenges. But then the moment that they win a challenge, she's like, we're the best, we're coming back, we're the comeback kids and stuff. And to me, it just feels like more of the same from her from last week. I feel like she was doing similar stuff earlier on when Yanu was losing. And in general, I don't think Yanu's being set up to win the game. But again, I have been seeing these arguments online with obviously the mermaid dragon comment coming up being more relevant. The fact that she does seem to be in the right over taking out Jess and Banu with them seemingly not equipped to play the game. So she is shown being right in that regard, and I do pay some credence to that. But at the end of the day, I feel like other people have stronger edits compared to her. I feel like at the end of the day, she has been undercut enough. Or even in this episode, we did see her like not knowing that Q was tricking her by making her think that he was about to quit the game. Like we had that confessional of her falling into that trap only for Q to contradict her. So again, I don't think Kenzie is a high contender, but again, she has moved up from last week. So because of that, she is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we actually have the highest ranked person on Yanu, and here we have Tiffany. And I feel like this was more the same for Tiffany, where it does seem like she would have been the swing vote had they gone the tribal. She got confessionals about how she doesn't want to choose between Kenzie and Q, only for Yanu to win the challenge, which, by the way, I felt like that was pretty foreshown, the fact that Yanu was going to win this challenge after they focused so much about how they kept losing and how there was a lot at stake with them losing this challenge and breaking the record for the most days without fire in the new era. So again, I feel like it was setting up for them to win the challenge, for Tiffany to avoid having to make this decision. But I still feel like Tiffany is someone who is definitely being set up to last a long time, but not someone who's going to win by the end of it. And I think that's kind of hard to assess on a player ranking like this. But for now, I do still have her here around the top half. But realistically, I don't think she's going to win by the end of it. So because of that, she is here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have another person who has dropped from last week, and here we have Maria. And this was another pretty bad episode for Maria here, where Charlie is directly undercutting her, where we have Maria explicitly saying that she wants to take out Ben, how the plan is foolproof, and how Ben is his long-term threat that needs to be dealt with, only for her to vote to keep Ben, which is a pretty bad look there. Now, as I talked about earlier with Jem, the reason I felt like Jem was staying over Ben was because I had more faith in Maria in the edit compared to Charlie, where I felt like Charlie had enough negativity with his edit and enough questions to where I feel like Maria was going to get the one up on Charlie, and I thought it was going to lead to Jem staying. But by Jem going and Maria being undercut instead, I do think that's a pretty bad look from Maria here, to where I have to have Charlie above her at this point. And I feel like with this being the second bad episode for her in a row, I am very much questioning whether she is a contender at this point, where I feel like other winners from the new era so far have not been undercut as much compared to Maria up to this point. And while I do feel like she has a lot of longevity on the season and she'll probably be a major character in the post-merge, I just feel like this was such a bad look for her that I have to drop her here to number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this person has also dropped from last week, but we do have Tevin. Now, I think Tevin has more room to recover compared to Maria, where really Tevin's main issue is him just not being on the show as much. Where in this episode, he once again doesn't really get much to do, where he only gets one confessional about how Liz is the only one not idol hunting. And while I was willing to give this lack of visibility some leeway last week, I do think this week I did have to knock it a bit more, especially considering that I think other people have moved up compared to Tevin. Now, at the end of the day, I still think Tevin could recover in the post-merge, especially now that Nami will be forced to play the game more. I do think his relationship with Tevin will become a major focus as well. And I think that'll definitely help Tevin on this power ranking. But I feel like with him not being as visible and with other people having bigger pros that I can prop up, I did have to drop him here to number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and this person has gone up quite a bit compared to last week, which is interesting considering that they could have gone home. But number 3, we do have Ben. And Ben is an interesting case considering he was one of the targets coming to this week. And there was actually a point in the episode where I thought he would have been the boot here. And as I explained earlier, I think a lot of that was because I was expecting Charlie to be undercut compared to Maria. And while Ben himself got pretty decent content in this episode, I was expecting that Charlie and Maria debate to override that and for Ben to possibly go home. But instead, he does end up staying with the Charlotte side winning out. And I think through that, as well as seeing some reactions online, it has caused me to reevaluate Ben's edit as a whole. And I think through that, I've kind of realized that Ben's edit up to this point has been very solid, where going back to his premiere, he has talked about how his strategy is to be himself, chill, and let people laugh. And we have seen that now throughout most of the pre-merge, where Sega has been presented as this kumbaya tribe that has kind of laid low and kind of just been silly. He's also been getting decent strategic content, where during the episode where he goes on the journey and loses his vote, he talks about how he doesn't want to reveal that because he recognizes that can make him expendable, and we see that very much carry the day. We get to this episode where he calls out Jem for cornering him and for playing too hard, and how if you're already thinking of the end game coming into it, that's not going to work out. And sure enough, we get him getting his way with Jem being taken out there. And even beyond that, he's gotten decent personal content. He got his intro package. We got in this episode him talking about how, despite the tough conditions, that this was a chance for him to learn the depths of his mind. And sure enough, we do see him face adversity and get out of it. But I think the biggest thing of all is his relationship with Charlie, which at this point does seem to be significant. Where even though it wasn't established in the premiere per se, it does get clearly established in episode 2, and we do see it carry the day in this episode, where Charlie is a major reason why Ben gets saved there. And yes, while there are concerns down the road that Charlie recognizes him as a shield that can be taken out later, I do think I have underestimated Ben as an edge contender. I do feel like there are many pros, in fact, to his edit looking back on it. And I think now that we've seen it kind of pile up and build upon itself, I am starting to change my mind on Ben, and I am starting to see him as a contender. And I think some of this is also propelled by the fact that there really aren't any super true frontrunners here. We're on like 44 and 45. I do think a lot of the top contenders are pretty close to each other. So I think to that end, that kind of allows someone like Ben to slip in to where if they want to have a more surprising outcome, it wouldn't shock me if Ben is that person. So again, I will admit that some of this is overreaction, some of it is me reacting to things I've seen online, but I do feel like considering the evidence, considering this episode as a whole and what it did to make me change my mind, I had decided to move Ben up here, and we'll have to see where things are moving forward. But for now, I do leave Ben here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and we have someone who I've talked about not too long ago, and here we have Charlie. And I do think this was a decent bounce back episode for him, where he obviously gets to go to Tribal, he gets to reestablish his relationship with Maria, who obviously is playing the middle with him, and he does actively get his way over Maria in taking out Jem or Ben, and his relationship with Ben is a major focal point within the episode. Now, yes, we don't really see them interacting one-on-one, which admittedly is a bit of a fault there, but again, he does get his way there, where he does talk quite a bit about playing the middle. He gets that whole salsa confessional about how that's similar to him playing the middle. And I think it's largely the fact that he gets his way over Maria, who I have been seeing as a contender for a lot of the season, that kind of causes him to overtake Maria. So I think all that's pretty good. Now, beyond that, I still recognize the flaws in his edit from before. I still feel like those flaws apply, and I could see that leading to Charlie being lower on this list moving forward. So again, it's not as if Charlie's a super tight contender at the end of the day, but at the end of the day, there are no true top contenders in my eyes, as I feel like everyone's pretty close to each other. Almost everyone has had pretty big holes in their edit up to this point, which makes it hard to really have a true number 1, unlike last season. But I do feel like Charlie has more pros for me. I feel like he definitely has a lot of longevity on the season, and it's for that reason that I do have to give him the edge here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most lucky person to win Survivor 46 going into the merge is Hunter. And I feel like Hunter has gotten the most consistent edit up to this point. I feel like he probably has the fewest holes in his edit up to this point, where this episode was mostly good for him, where he does end up finding the Beware advantage after getting the setup in episode 2 to do so, which I did criticize him for at the time, considering that he did talk about how he was going to find the idol only for Brandon to find it instead. But now seeing that he does end up finding it after all, I do feel like that flaw has kind of corrected itself. You also have Venus, who has called him out before. Again, another flaw in his edit from earlier on in the season. But even that has kind of corrected itself, where he does get the fight back against Venus by pointing out how annoying she is and how he essentially gets her to admit that she's using him as a meat shield, which I do feel like makes him come out on top over her. So again, I feel like a lot of the flaws that I pointed out with him earlier in the season have kind of corrected themselves. And I feel like that does leave him this high on the list. Now, I do feel like there are still some minor things you can point out, where for one, he does agree to this meat shield alliance between Q and Tim, which, as I talked about earlier, I don't feel like is going to succeed, especially with Maria being talked about as an option there, and the fact that Hunter gets to talk about how he thinks his alliance is good. But I think obviously the bigger knock to him is the fact where he comes in claiming to be the biggest superfan around, only to then think that Pearl Islands happened after Guatemala, which is pretty ridiculous there. He obviously loses the challenge, loses his vote, and I cannot believe I have such a phony this high on my power ranking. How dare he claim to be a superfan? But in all seriousness, I do think from a pure gains perspective, there also is some concern about him being too big of a threat, where he once again single-handedly wins the challenge for his tribe, which could make him come off as a big threat. Also, him volunteering to go on the journey to begin with is a bit questionable. So again, I think from a pure gains standpoint, there are still some question marks there. And as I said earlier, no one's really a true contender. I feel like Hunter is largely here because he has the cleanest edit, though realistically, I could very well see him being taken out down the line as well. Again, I feel like this season is still very much in flux, but I feel like compared to everyone else, I think I had the fewest negatives to say about Hunter from an edit perspective, which is why I'm still going to give him the edge here, even though I could see this list changing in the coming weeks. But for now, I do have him here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm covering other shows as well, such as Big Brother Canada 12, as well as The Amazing Race 36, so you can expect weekly power rankings of those shows. I'm on Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.